Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for joining us on Thought Adventure Podcast in our new type of style or series that we're discussing, where we bring on guests, we discuss various topics related to intellectual, theological matters. And today we have Brother Yusuf Ponders, a fellow co-panelist, co-founder of Thought Adventure Podcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
And today we brought you on because we thought it'd be a great opportunity to have a discussion about your new book. So congratulations for writing a new book.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, man. You know, this is, I'm always impressed when I come across somebody who's able to write a book, more than just simply a lengthy article. So it's just really, alhamdulillah.
It's funny because it kind of happened by accident.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be an article. Like, it was originally commissioned to just be like a 3,500 word essay. And then the first essay, part one, ended up becoming like 20,000 words, and I hadn't finished yet. So I had to apologize to Hamza. I was like, that 3,500 word essay ended up being a lot more.
All right.
And then, so he said, we'll just do it in two parts. So I gave him the first part that got published on the website. And then part two ended up being a ridiculous amount of words. And so then we said, why don't we just combine them and turn them into a book? So the project became much bigger.
Wow, alhamdulillah.
But it just opened up and opened up and opened up. And every time I was like writing something, it was like, I should probably go into this. I should probably go into that. And then it just got a bit out of hand.
No, it's good though, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, now we got a book.
So I thought it'd be great, bring you on, discuss your book. Obviously, it's a massive book and it's a massive topic. Well, it's not massive.
It's not massive. It's like,
yeah, I'm not want to, you know, I don't want to, what's the word?
150 pages.
Yeah, 150 pages, but it's a massive topic. That's what I was trying to say. And you cover so much within those areas of the topic. I thought it'd be important that people are aware of the book, that inshallah people read the book. I read the book and I was gripped by the first part of the book, certainly. And then, you know, as you go through the book, the ideas that you bring. I always think a good book or anything where when I read something or even listen to something and I think it's good is when it gets in my head, the clogs start turning and I think, how would I express that? How would I use this? How would I understand this? You know, I'm constantly thinking myself about what's being said, of how I'm going to utilize these ideas that I'm learning. And certainly, alhamdulillah, when I was reading it, that's certainly how I was coming across. So I want to maybe go into some points in regards to the book. But the first question is basically, I know you've spoken a lot about nihilism in the past, but why did you feel the need to write this book or the long essay that turned into a book?
Yeah, I guess the subject has always been something that interested me a lot. So, like, I was an atheist once upon a time, and I did feel myself that life was very meaningless or pointless for a little while, and I had to struggle with this type of thing as well. And I link it specifically to like depression, and I mentioned this in the book, depression and suicide, and how there is like an implicit connection between feelings of depression, or people that end their life implicitly believe that life isn't worth living, or that life is, it's not meaningful enough to continue to exist. So I make the connection between that. Like, I have people that I know that have committed suicide.
Well, you mentioned it in the book. You actually mentioned about your father, and as a kid growing up, and what really struck me is how you and your brother were sleeping, and you thought that they'd forgotten to wake you up for school, so you pretended to stay asleep, not knowing what was occurring downstairs.
Yeah. But so just FYI, so he didn't commit suicide. Well, we don't think he did.
Yeah.
He died from a heroin overdose. And the way that it happened, it doesn't necessarily look like suicide. Like, he was in the living room. His dad, my granddad, was in the living room with him, and he had a towel over his head. So it looked like he'd hidden himself to take it. And then, but that had a massive impact on me.
Yeah.
And then, like, my relationship with my dad and the difficulty that I sort of faced with that. I think it's funny because people say, oh, you only became Muslim to deal with trauma. But for me, it was the other way around. Like, I became an atheist
to deal with
the trauma.
Yeah.
Because of the notion of, like, why would God do this to me? Because I was raised as a Catholic. So I had belief to begin with, and then I moved away from belief completely because of these negative experiences.
Yeah, and so because what it is that when people hear the word nihilism, because the book's called, isn't it? It's called Nihilism.
Islam and Nihilism.
It's like Nihilism and Islam, My Poison and My Cure. Yeah, that's the title of the book.
Yeah.
But when people hear the word nihilism, they tend to think of this as some sort of abstract philosophical idea that philosophers talk about. But when you introduce the book, you're talking about real world experiences that I think not just connects with, people who are academic, but also connects to ordinary people because you lived, in a working class environment. These were experiences that you felt as well. And I know there's other brothers that have converted to Islam who similarly have expressed certain, ideas around nihilism prior to converting to Islam. So I think there's that issue in terms of the word nihilism and its connection. And somehow some people think it's something separate. And I think that's what you're trying to do, isn't it? Trying to create that link between real world experiences.
Because nihilism is this fancy word. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we? And the general public, I don't think, are really that familiar with the word. Like, you can say it to the average person and they're what's that? Like, what is it? But if you describe it to them and explain nihilism, it is something I think people are very familiar with. The experience of meaninglessness. At some point in their life, everyone goes through that, especially from like a secular background. And even if they don't do it publicly, if trauma ever hits them or if life gets difficult, when you're alone and you're dealing with stress, these questions are inevitably going to be popping up into your head. And if they've not happened to you yet, they will at some point in the future. And if they've not happened yet and they're not and it's not gotten to the future, you at least know someone who's had to deal with these kind of problems of feeling like life is meaningless. There's always someone in the party or someone in the family or someone that brings up these things that are a bit too deep. And they're referred to as don't you're ruining the mood, or that kind of thing. I think everyone has experiences with nihilism, and I try to make that quite clear in the book that if either you have experienced it, you will experience it, or you know someone who's going through it, and I think everyone falls into one of those categories.
This is interesting. I saw this short clip of Professor Brian Greene, who's like a physicist, quite popular. I don't know if you come across him. He's he's one of those popular science guys that popularizes sciences. But anyway, he talked about this point. And he said the most burning, I think it was the most burning question, is how do you create significance of a finite life in an infinite universe? So this idea of cosmic nihilism, the universe is just infinite in size. It's meaningless. So how do you create your own meaning, even though yourself are just finite and going to extinguish within 70, 80 years? So it echoes that point, which is that everybody has these types of ideas and thoughts. What is meaning? What is purpose? Is everything out there just useless, meaningless? I always find this tends to be the case as well the night before a big exam. So whenever I was at university, the night before the exam, everybody's together, maybe revising, and somebody says, "Is this all that's life's about?" That type of thing, isn't it? I don't know if you had the same, during exam period.
Or even like after a heavy session and like someone's feeling ill.
Yeah.
When they've been getting drunk or going to parties or taking too many drugs, and they have these sort of existential crises at the end of it, like, they're dealing with hangovers in the morning and things like that.
Yeah.
And I'll never drink again. Blah, blah, blah. So I think everyone has a phase or some sort of experience where they can link it or relate it to this.
Yeah.
This idea.
So you wrote this book. It's addressing obviously from your own personal experiences, and then addressing the sort of the intellectual side of it, and then bringing it back to the individual as well. So I want to maybe talk about some aspects of the book. You start off by, and I think maybe to a certain extent people sort of think they know what nihilism is, but I don't know if you can sort of explain nihilism and sort of the thing that you also call pathological nihilism as well.
Nihilism is it's from the Greek, like nothing. Nihil means nothing, ism. And so the root of it is just this idea that everything is meaningless, but it can open up into like many different categories. So if you're talking, and I mentioned these in the book, if you're talking about like epistemological nihilism, it's the idea that like truth is unattainable, like you're not going to find truth. If you're talking about moral nihilism, you're talking about the fact that there's no such thing as good or evil, that the whole discourse is flawed. If you're talking about what were the other?
Cosmic nihilism.
Cosmic nihilism or existential nihilism. Cosmic nihilism is the idea that the universe is meaningless, like on a grand scale. And then existential nihilism is on, well, if the universe is meaningless and I'm a little tiny fragment of that, then I am also meaningless. That, like, I'm not even a scratch on the bonnet of the car of the universe. It's just, I will not be remembered, and anything I do is ultimately not going to have that much of an impact in the world in the grand scheme of things. And so, like, me and everything around me is completely without purpose or function, and whether it exists well or not is irrelevant. It's not important.
So what about this idea that when you talk about the pathological state?
So is that with reference to a particular quote?
So you were talking about how there's a psychological, pathological state of nihilism. So
like a sickness instead of
sickness. So because most people don't philosophize to nihilism, do they?
So it's like basically this idea in particular comes from Nietzsche. I'd say that he describes it as like a sickness. So it's not like a position. So, like someone becomes a vegan, or if they become a Kantian or whatever. Like, usually what you'll find is someone has sort of reasoned their way into this position. With nihilism, it's not described as that kind of thing from Nietzsche. He's just talking about it in the sense that you have these conditions that have taken hold of a society. And he says these are the consequence of the death of God, and that this is like a cloud that hovers over, and everyone is then dealing with the consequences of that. And it's a sickness that grips people, and it's something that they're not necessarily, it's not like everyone's got like a deductive, rational argument as to why they are a nihilist. It's just certain things are happening to them. They're being overwhelmed by too much information. There's all this madness going on in the world. You've got global warming. There's wars, everywhere. Like, people are just scared, and people are just overwhelmed and confused. And so then this is like the consequence of all of that. And it's just something that they find themselves in, rather than.
So it's a state of it's a feeling. It's a state of being, without them understanding why they're feeling that way. Yeah. And so, in essence, we live in an environment in which there are background ideas around us. We're sort of inculcated with ideas, and then individuals maybe not aware of these background ideas are in the state of feeling of hopelessness or the meaninglessness of life, and then fall into whatever depression or problems, or just hedonism as well as another issue. And yet they don't know why they're there.
Because I think a lot of it's tied to even like the education system. So if you remember when we were younger, a common thing in education is they're like, we need to fill the children with hope, and so they'll tell us about how you can be anything you want, and rah, rah, rah. And realistically, it's not the case at all. You're not going to be whatever you want. They don't really prepare you for a working environment. Like, they're not teaching you how to do your finances. They're not teaching you practical skills to be a man out in the open and like engage. These are things they just sort of like leave on the wayside, and then they'll focus on these weird topics. Like, you've got an hour a week where you're going over Nazi Germany, like very specific parts of history, or you'll be going over algebra and all of these things that maybe you might never even use again in your life. So you spend all your life preparing for something, the majority of which you never use again. And then you get thrown into this strange environment, which you've not been prepared for.
Yeah.
And many people end up struggling. Like, I can't tell you how many young men in particular that I'm speaking to, and I'm sure women obviously are going through similar issues in their own unique way. But just young people that they're struggling to figure out where they're going, why they're going, where they're coming from, what's going on, how are they going to deal with the situation, how do I build upon all of this, how do I create a life for myself, how am I supposed to, and like, especially with the financial situation around the world as well, things just seem absolutely crazy. Like, whereas back in the day, you could at least be somewhat like under the idea that you might end up with a property that belongs to you, and that wasn't that unreasonable for the people of the past. And now it just seems like such a foreign thing. Like, rents themselves, not just purchasing a house, but rent alone is extortionate. So people are like trying to figure out, how am I ever going to like get a foothold here? What am I supposed to do? And they're confused. They just don't know what's going on. And you've got access to the internet, and so like you've got millions of opinions coming at you. If you think back in the day, if you grew up in a Christian household, you were protected by the walls of your household. You were protected by the gated community, or the people that you had around you were generally, in most areas, the same as you. So there wasn't that much of a clash. And the life that you lived wasn't that different from the life your granddad lived, or the life your grandchildren will live. Like there was very slow rates of change, and things weren't that crazy. And now it's just not like that. Like the life we live is nothing like the life our granddads live, and the life our grandchildren will live is going to be nothing like the life we live. Like things are vastly changing, and so it feels very difficult to even prepare children for the world to come, because you don't even know what that world is going to look like. There's too many singularities. They're going over one after the other. Like now we've got the advent of AI.
Yeah.
Like how is that going to transform the world in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years? We've got no idea how am I going to prepare my daughter for a world I can't even
comprehend. Conceptualize, isn't it? What's going to be like?
And you're trying to keep up with all of this progress. It's difficult to keep up with things, even in my own life. Like all of it, I used to be dead into computers when I was younger, but things have gotten so complex now. I just can't be bothered with it. I would invest the time to try to figure these things out. And I used to be a hacker in Habbo Hotel when I was a teenager. I don't know. Do you remember Habbo?
No.
It was like a little cartoon social media.
Oh right.
And it was like a hotel, and you had a little character. You walked around. You bought rooms. And like I used to forget that if you got banned, I knew how to unban myself, and like circumnavigate all of the restrictions that they had and stuff like that. And I was dead into it. I'd spend hours trying to figure these things out. But now I just like things are too much. And that's just in one. It's not even one lifetime. That's in like 20 years. Things have just developed and changed. Like if you look at the computer games I grew up on, Super Nintendo, Sega Mega Drive, platform games, flat, one-dimensional. You're just moving from left to right.
Yeah.
And then you get that, and then you compare it to something like Skyrim, and then you look at how AI is going to transform even some of these classics. Like I've seen videos of how they're going to implement AI into the NPC characters, so you can talk to them in game.
Some of these games are just they look like they're work. You know what I mean? You have to put so much effort into it. And he's like,
I can't be bothered.
It's just too much effort.
But then that I can't be bothered.
Yeah.
So that experience that we have with games, because there's too much
information.
The same kind of thing happens with life.
Yeah.
Because the games are just catching up with life now. They used to be just simple things.
Yeah.
You would go on to try to escape life.
Yeah.
And now they're becoming so complex that they're imitating life.
Yeah.
And when you're seeing nihilism express itself in these games, which I think is becoming more and more and more common, and you'll see videos talking about this where people like they have this nostalgia for what it used to be like playing games. Like there used to be a sense of joy because they were simpler. Like you could just get onto them, and obviously when you're younger as well, you don't have to worry about paying bills, or you don't have to feel guilty about wasting your time and things like that. You're a dependent. You don't have to worry about all these things. But then as you become an adult, your time becomes a lot more serious. Your finitude, mortality becomes more present. And so these things you can't help but think about them. And even if when you're trying to play a game to sign off, to forget about the world, you can't help but remember, I've got to be engaged in it to some degree. Mm-hmm. And there's we can go into this for hours, but there's this intimate relationship between the feelings of nihilism and the meaninglessness of life when you're playing games, because you can invest hours and hours and hours and hours becoming the best blacksmith.
Yeah. Yeah, on the game.
On Skyrim, and then like you reach 100 level 100, and then you're like, what was that for?
Yeah, exactly.
What was the point in that? How does that translate into any real world success? Yeah. And then, but the thing is this is the type of feeling that people have
in the real world.
Yeah. Especially if you fall into sort of atheism, agnosticism, and you're thinking, I can never get the right answers. I'm never going to find truth. There is no life after death. It's just nothingness. Yeah. All of these feelings just give rise to this idea. What's the point?
Well, you give an example, don't you, of the Monopoly game? Do you remember? You quoted a philosopher who gave the example of the Monopoly game he was playing with his grandmother. Mm. Yeah. I don't know if you want to explain that one.
I love that quote.
Yeah.
But it's the same idea. It's like,
exactly the same idea.
Yeah. It's this kid, and he loves playing Monopoly. His grandma used to smash him.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I'm going to figure out how to smash her. So he spends all of his time and all of his energy playing with a friend over the summer, and he figures out the game. He works it out. And so then he goes back, he plays his grandma, and he smashes her. And he's dead proud. And she goes, okay. And now everything goes back into the box. And it's like, you got excited, you got yourself worked up, but it wasn't yours. And it's never going to be yours to keep.
All those hotels, all those money, it's all going back in the box.
Yeah.
It means nothing at the
Yeah,
end.
exactly. And the same thing applies to life. Like, people
Exactly.
fight, people clamber over dunya. Yeah, they're constantly trying to attain as much out of the world as they possibly can, but they can't take it with them. When they die, it's people, clamber.
And the quote goes on to say, even the body goes back into the box
Yeah,
under the ground. You don't even own that. Yeah.
Exactly. Like everything gets taken away from you. And so then the question is what matters? Was it worth it? Like, are these things everything that turns to dust, is that really worth the energy and the effort? And the thing is this is often, when you've got the optimistic nihilism that people like Kierkegaard, for example, try to put forward. What they're trying to do is they put forward this sort of like ideal Disney princess mentality where it's like, this just means freedom. You can do whatever you want. You can become whatever you want.
Because there's no consequences.
But this is the same type of nonsense that's filled in the heads of children in primary school, where it's like, you can be whatever you want. But the reality is 99% of people are not going to become millionaires. Yeah, 99% of people are not going to be driving Bugattis. They're not going to be majority of people are going to be average or below average or just over average. Like, there's a tiny minority of people, and maybe some of the children that you hear in high school, in primary school, that get told this might become something huge. They might become famous. But the reality is it's a minority of people. And then the question is okay, so number one, that gets taken away from them. It's not even like what they achieve gives them long-lasting happiness anyway, because you see constantly stories of suicides, depression, drug abuse, drug overdose throughout the celebrity sphere, which is the first thing. And number two, the question is, well, what about the rest of them? How is everyone else supposed to continue with life if all of these promises of achievement and great fame and success and wealth and so on and so forth just isn't in the cards for most people? What then?
Yeah.
So if they're putting all of this energy and effort in, to summarize, if they're putting all of this energy and effort in, and they're not even achieving anything in the end of it, if because this is the difference between Monopoly. At least with Monopoly, you can close the box and you can go on.
Yeah,
and you can do something else. You play a different game, get Buckaroo out or something. But in life, when the box is closed, you can't do that. So if you are playing the Monopoly of life, and you've put all of that energy and that effort in, just to die at the end of it.
Yeah.
And with all of that pain, all of that suffering, all of that everything, the question, and this is where it comes to suicide, it's when people are asking, should I end my life? They're saying, what's the point? Is it really worth continuing to live with all of this pain and all of this suffering if it's for nothing?
Yeah.
Why would I continue? Why should I continue to torture myself? If life equals suffering, why would I want more life?
Yeah.
Why would I want another day? And this is where the whole principle of wanting to end your life comes in, because when they're experiencing the pain, when they're experiencing the trauma, they can't associate it to anything greater. They can't abstract anything from that other than sadness, other than depression. And
No. I think the issue is what you mentioned there, is that people put in so much effort to try and win the game, but the vast majority of people are not going to win the game.
There can only be one winner.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to lose. A lot of people are going to lose, and therefore they're thinking, I'm trying to win this game. And you've been told what it means to win the game: fame, money, material things generally, the idea of happiness, whatever that means. So everybody's trying to chase it, but the vast majority of people are only going to get partial success in that, or probably no success. They're not going to be the very top. Those people are going to be, like you said, are going to start to say, okay, is it really worth it?
And did you ever play Mario Kart?
Yeah.
So if you're playing Mario Kart, there's only one person's going to get first place.
Yeah.
You can't share first place. Yeah. Now, if you're playing Mario Kart and you're in like 14th place and you've been lapped like 10 times, Like,
or you're
people
playing
give
FIFA,
up.
Yeah, playing FIFA and you're 4-0 down.
Yeah,
And it's not
or
even-
20-0 down.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, and he stole the first
it gets to a
half.
point where it's like, why
let's
continue
restart
playing
now.
the game? Like, I can't bring it back. I've lost.
Yeah.
I'd quit. And people rage quit. That is
Rage quit.
no, that's what
Crazy,
is suicide.
yeah.
Is a rage quit in life. It's an aggressive end of your own being. And like in the computer game, like throwing the controller to the side or turning the computer off. I mean, like, that's it. I'm not playing anymore.
Yeah.
That's a giving up because you recognize the fruitlessness of continuing.
You're right.
And the same kind of thing can express itself within life itself, within living as a human being. And it's associated with the value system. Now, this is separate from the question of whether or not the value system is true or not.
Yeah.
It's simply to discuss the consequences of certain value systems. And then obviously a discussion about the truth.
So that's really interesting, because you talked at the beginning where you talked about education and how in schools, and I remember this because I was told this in primary school, so it's like junior school. But it's called junior school my time. It was primary school now, so it's like between the ages of 5 and 11. And we were told that at your age, you could literally do anything you want. And I was thinking, no, I can't, because I wasn't very fast. Yeah, so I knew I wasn't going to be a 100-meter sprinter. But I knew straight away that didn't make sense. But what you're saying is that they're saying you can do anything you want. You can be anyone you want. Nowadays, they're saying you can be a man or a woman. You could be
a giraffe.
Yeah, you could be any, a cat. There's reports about that at schools. And at the same time, this is really interesting that you said, at the same time, what you then study has very little correspondence or correlation, I should say, to when you actually live your life. So you spend from the ages of 4 years of age all the way up to about 18 or so, 16 to 18. If you go into university, 21, 22, and you come out of it, so, 20 years or so, almost 20 years, 15 to 20 years of your life, and you don't know what to do.
Yeah, you've not been prepared for the world you're being projected into.
That's right. And then at the same time, you've been told you can do what you want. Whereas in the past, and I think you mentioned this point about when you talk about tradition in the book, in the past, and I'm talking about like pre-industrial sort of era in Europe, you grew up in a blacksmith family.
Most likely you're going to end up becoming a blacksmith.
Yeah.
So this is important.
And your training is all leading to that.
Yeah, and it's relevant, and this can be freeing in a sense. There's a really good book called The Paradox of Choice.
Yeah.
But I can't remember his name. Barry Schwartz or something.
I can't remember. You mentioned it in the book.
Yeah. But the same thing is here. It's like when people talk as if like infinite choice is somehow like paradise.
The ideal, yeah.
Yeah, that we should all like sort of move towards that. But it turns out for the average person, that's not true at all. And we're talking here about the average Joe. The majority of people, they hate too much choice. And when they're given an infinite choice, they won't make choices. And ironically, that is a choice. But they'll just sort of fall back and refuse to pick something explicitly. And so there's been studies related to this where, people that are working and they've got part of their contracts is to do with what is it when you become an old age? A pensioner.
Yeah.
The pension.
Yeah.
And what they found is when they gave everyone all of the choices that were available in terms of pensions, that the vast majority of employees would not pick a pension company. They just
too many.
Just too much. Who's got the time?
Yeah.
There's like 50 companies I've got to go through.
Yeah.
I can't figure out which one's the best
all
option.
different financial products for each company.
Yeah, and it's like, and it opens up with too much complexity, and it's like, this just seems ridiculous. I can't be bothered. I don't have the time. I don't even understand the majority of the things that
I
are saying.
suppose there's also that idea of the fear of
picking the wrong thing.
And what is it? Buyer's remorse, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's your responsibility then because you made the wrong choice.
Yeah.
I gave you all the information. So what they tend to do,
it's your fault.
Yeah, so they won't make the choice because they look at it and they see this is pointless. I can't make a proper decision on this. So they won't. And what they found is if they reduce the choices, that's not to say reduce it to none or don't give them any choice at all, but if they reduced it from an infinite choice or all of the options to say 2 or 3, that they found a massive increase in the amount of people that were making choices. And, and if you don't have to make a choice at all, then it's not even something that's going to enter the mind as a problem. It's not something you need to think about. It's not something you need to worry about. So like you mentioned before, like if you're growing up in a blacksmith's family, This is part of your education. You grow up around the blacksmith. You're learning this from the beginning. And so what you'll see is that people can become professionals very, very quickly because they don't have to make, the wisdom is not having to make your own mistakes. You can learn from the mistakes of others. We hear this in science and things like that, building on the shoulders of giants. If you grow up in a blacksmith family, if your father has grown up as a blacksmith, he's made certain mistakes and he's perfected his trade and he's become good at it. Yeah. When he's teaching you, you're not having to make the same mistakes that he makes because he's telling you straight away, we do it like this and not like this. If you do it like this, this problem arises. We can circumnavigate that by just not doing that. You don't need to go away and make that now. So you already have this huge advantage on the earlier generation because they're giving you all these shortcuts to success. And then you build up on that. And then if you make any mistakes, the next generation again. And so you see this, and this is why sort of family hand down businesses were very, very good and and admired. If you were a part of a bakery family that had been going for hundreds of years, your family is producing very good bakery products or buns or whatever it is that you're producing.
Cakes and buns.
Cakes, bread, whatever. Because your family has had time to perfect its trade and to teach you from a very early age, and you're not wasting your time studying things that are relevant to that trade. You don't have that now.
What's interesting is that people who have, in what they quote in the West, been successful, their education is very different. Like, for example, I'm thinking of Bill Gates. I'm thinking of, the Apple founder, Steve Jobs. They didn't go through the traditional sort of educational path that a lot of people go through. They actually, I think Bill Gates, he left and he started developing his own software from the ages of 13, 14 years of age and developed his skills that way. Mark Zuckerberg left university and started Facebook because he developed his skills outside of university. Wozniak, who's the co-founder of Apple, was building his own computers, prior. He didn't learn that through the education system. So they sort of developed outside of the education system and, through that trade type thing, which obviously you're saying in the past people were getting from their parents, from their community that they were growing up in, and therefore becoming effective in the workplace or in life.
And this is good because number one, we are social beings. And so part of that connection with people you're close to can be important in developing a sort of meaningful relationship. And obviously the key word here is meaningful. Now, one of the biggest issues we have with the current education system is it's the weirdest thing ever. It treats children like products that have been manufactured, and then it puts them on, it treats the schooling system like factories.
Yeah.
And so the only thing that children have got in common is their date of manufacturer. Yeah. Or when were you born? Between these dates, okay, you go into this class.
Yeah.
And then you go down the conveyor belt 1 year at a time, and then everything is standardized. Now the problem with this is that it's so general that they're thinking we need something that can be applied across the country or across the globe. And if you think of how many schools there might be in any particular country, and they're standardizing the education system for everyone across this entire field, the issue is it's not taking individuals into account.
Yeah. So let's link this now, because obviously we're going into education, which is a big topic.
Yeah.
But there is a link
to the nihilism. Because the issue here is that if you're not being taken into account as an individual, it can be very difficult to deal with these things. And so people that are stupid, like for example, my brother, he's not stupid. Yeah, he's not an idiot. He was someone who hit puberty very early. He became man-sized very quickly, and he just towered over everyone in his classes. He had a lot of energy, and he was a very active person. He was in football club, he was in the rugby club, he was sick at cross country. These things he excelled at. But they would then tell him, listen, you've got to sit down and do geography, you've got to sit down and learn French, you've got to sit down and do, and they're overwhelming him with too many different subjects,
which most of them are just not going to be practical.
Not practical
lives.
And he doesn't care about them. There's no, he can't see, not like French. Teaching French in English schools is one of the weirdest things ever, because there's this long-seeded history of the English versus the French. We've got an animosity, and this is sort of given to us from an early age. There's so many jokes about the French. I don't see how it makes any sense to have this sort of culture of anti-Frenchness within the wider society, and then make that a compulsory part of your education in the school when they're the butt of so many jokes. And it's nothing against like the French language or French people in particular, but
I think it's the history of
the 100-Year War and things like that. Like
Yeah.
the French being Catholic, the English being Protestant, there was a huge history of battle and war between even our the flipping. You know, when you flip someone off with the two fingers.
Right. Yeah.
The history of that, in particular, is that the French
Long
used to
ago.
remove the fingers of the archers,
Yeah.
and so when you were about to lay a volley upon them, you would display your two fingers to the French.
But I think also, I think the link with the French why it's taught is because the English aristocracy for centuries
Were French,
were
yeah,
French.
were the Normans,
and used to speak French.
yeah.
And even today, I think they still learn French and they still speak it. So
Yeah, so but the point is that that's not applicable to the
Yeah, yeah.
average public who
Yeah,
who has an animosity towards the French. Number one, they're the butt of many jokes, and it's such a common theme that many people just don't want to learn it. And this is just one example of a particular lesson that's being put on the plate of children. And you ask the majority of the public, and they'll talk. What do you know? What do you remember from history class? Oh, something about Hitler. Like they can only, and you don't need 5 years, 1 hour a week on the topic of history to be able to mention, oh, Hitler.
Yeah.
Like what is it that people have kept from the education system? And this is the issue. It just treats children like things on a conveyor belt. They're receptacles. They reach each level, and we just need to make sure they get this information. And if for whatever reason they can't sit down and they can't focus because you're teaching them boring stuff, then they're the problem, not the education system. We need to drug them up. We need to give them Ritalin. Oh, he must have a disease. He must have a problem. He must have a mental illness. And then they try to if the children don't fit this box, many of them don't in many different ways, then it's the suggestion that there's a problem with the education system isn't something that comes to mind. The problem is the children, and the issue is that the teachers themselves, they're held to targets, and there's anxiety for the teacher, making sure that their class has good percentages and rates and things like that. And like all of this becomes so abstract that it doesn't take the individuals into consideration, and it's not preparing children for a world that they're going to be engaged with. And this exacerbates the issue of nihilism. It's like, what am I doing for so much of my life? And even when you're looking at successful, and when you're looking at some of the most successful people in the world, they're college dropouts, university dropouts, like they are people that exited this system
to educate themselves on how to function in the society.
And so then you're asking, well, what is it that I'm being told I need to invest in?
Yeah.
Like why? And even when you're in high school and you talk, it's such like it was for me, and it was for many of my friends. It's like, what's the point on GCSEs? Why am I sweating my back out to try and do this? Who gives a crap? And then even when they leave that, if they go to college, it's not because they wanted to go to college. It's because they don't want to go to work. It's like
because they're not prepared for work.
Yeah, and then when they're in college, they're sold the student loan as if it's free money.
Yeah,
and then they'll go to university because they want to party. It's like Pleasure Island. They don't want to go into the working place. They want to avoid it because it's scary to them.
Yeah,
and it's a huge responsibility. There's a huge weight on your shoulders. You've got to start thinking. Some people are forced into that. Some people end up having to go into education and go into their own housing and start worrying about bills because they've got bad relationships with their parents or whatever. But when children are given the choice, they'll avoid the harder option. So when the young are going to university, it's treated like Pleasure Island. It's escapism. It's to avoid having to deal with a world that they've not been prepared for. And the more they have to engage in this play, the more they want to remain as children. And when their position is forced to become an adult, and this is where the tension comes in, the existential crisis. It's like, who am I?
Yeah.
What am I doing? What am I here for?
I think also, as you're explaining about the education, the problems with the education system, I think it feeds into the epistemic nihilism as well. Because then you've got people who just don't have the intellectual tools to be able to outweigh ideas and outweigh information and be critical about that information, because they've never really been taught to do that, to live life practically in that sense. And so they come out the other end, have all these told you can do what you want, you're free, it's all about this life.
You're a rational animal.
Yeah.
And even that is like absurd, because there's this whole Aristotelian idea, you're the rational animal, as if you're born with it. And it's just not true. Like, being rational can be very difficult. And so, when it comes to learning it, it takes a lot of energy. And
it does. And it's like you have to learn how to learn, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the issue. And you have to be able to learn how to become critical and adopt ideas.
Yeah.
And all of that you don't develop within the society. Instead, you're told,
or naturally either.
yeah, yeah. All, what you're basically told is, you know, you're free to do whatever you want. You have to make your own life. You then go through this whole education system, come out at the end of it. You don't have any ability to evaluate ideas, understand things, and yet you're told every decision you now make is of critical importance. And it goes back to that Monopoly example that you mentioned earlier, where the person thinks, or the Mario Kart, I'm in 16th place. Is it really worth it?
I've been overlapped 50 times.
Yeah.
Am I ever going to catch up to the person
Exactly.
first?
Yeah.
What's the point?
So in the book, you go in and you talk about the different causes of nihilism. So you talk about the rise of post-truth. Yeah, so I don't know if you want to just explain that, and because I think it sort of overlaps what we've already discussed.
Yeah,
anyway.
so it's just this idea that like people are coming out of this education system, they're realizing like they've just spent 5 years in higher education and however many years in early education, like 15, 16 years of their lives being taught things, and after all of that, they've only just barely scratched the surface because their education has been so broad and it's been dipping into so many different subjects that you don't really have the opportunity to go into them in any depth at all. Whereas, like, for example, we mentioned the blacksmith back in the day. If that's all you knew, by the time you're 15 years old, you're a sick blacksmith. Like, if that's all you've been learning for 15 years, that's your education, day in, day out. Come here, we're making swords, we're making armor, we're doing this, we're doing that. In 15 years, you're going to become very, very good at it. And and especially if there's like a duty and a responsibility and it's understood, you've had your time to play, son. You've hit puberty now. You're a man.
Yeah.
You've got to get to the mines. You've got to get into the blacksmith. You've got to get into whatever it is. Yeah. Then you can become, you can excel in it a lot because you're not wasting time in other subjects, which are just not going to be relevant to your longer plan. So like you can feel like you've made the progress. Whereas in the current public education system, it's so broad. You're not being prepared at all. So what happens now is that when people end up coming into the real world, they've been shown too much information in too much subjects. They recognize, I can't process all of this. I've barely scratched the subject. How am I ever going to achieve truth? And then on top of that, you've got multiple news sources. We've got the access to the internet. There's a million different opinions. You can't even really tell which one's the majority anymore. And you've got conspiracies. So even places of authority that you should be able to trust, you're not even sure if you can anymore because they've done all sorts of mad things and you're like, oh, that's absurd, that's absurd, that's absurd. And then, you know, a few years later, private documents have been released, public access, and it goes, oh crap, all of that was true. So I can't trust the government. I can't trust people in authority. I can't trust anyone, even in the way British culture as well. And this is a huge part of why I became like an atheist. When I was a youth, I think I mentioned it in the book, this fantasy was fed to me, and it was like there's a tooth fairy, and I really don't like it, and this is why I don't even try to like instill this in my daughter. But if you put your tooth under the pillow, the tooth fairy will come and take the money and swap it, and they
take the tooth and give you money.
Yeah, and when they wait till you sleep, and then they go and swap it. Or Santa.
Right.
You know, when you go to sleep, Santa comes through the chimney. Oh, if you leave cookies on the table and some mince pies and a carrot.
Right.
Then Santa will eat it, and you wake up in the morning, and lo and behold, there's bites in the carrot. Yeah, there's someone's ate some of the mince pie. Oh, it must have been bloody Santa Claus. And like you're fed all of these lies. And for me, like my dad, he was a heroin addict, and I have memories of him taking heroin. I visually, me and my brother are making potions, quote unquote, with soap and washing up liquid and whatever in the sink in the bathroom. And my dad sat on the toilet taking drugs, and he just called them his medicine. And he went to prison. And we would go visit him in prison, and he would wear bibs. And we were told, no, we're visiting him at the hospital. And we would say, why is he wearing bibs? Oh, they've been playing football outside.
Oh,
and some of them wear bibs and some of them don't.
Yeah.
And so we were filled with all of this fantasy, this veil that was protecting us about what the world was and about what was going on in it. And then when my dad died, pretty much within a year, all of that collapsed. It was around about the same time I found out the Easter Bunny wasn't real. I caught my mum dyeing eggs in the kitchen. I found
so as a born Muslim, all these things we don't we probably have our own fantasies, but certainly not those types of things.
So Easter Bunny became something that wasn't real. The tooth fairy, my mum's the one that's been put in the pan in the thing. My dad wasn't on medicine. He was a drug addict. He wasn't in prison. He wasn't in the hospitals. He was in prison. Blah, 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 blah. But one thing after the other, collapse. And then it's like, I've been living in a fantasy for years. And at that point, it's like, I can't trust anyone. And I think things like this, implicit specifically in Western culture as well, perpetuate skepticism. Because it's so common that you're lied to in your youth. It's so common that people will just shape reality in such a way to make it exciting for you, make it interesting. But I think this has wider consequences when people get older, because they fall into skepticism. They have trust issues, which is not necessarily. Obviously, it's good to be skeptical to a certain degree. Yeah, it's a tool. But I think people, they get PTSD because of all of this. Yeah, and especially from being a child. And
so they become jaded, isn't it?
Yeah,
they just don't trust. They just don't accept anything.
And this can express itself to on an impractical scale, where it's like, I'm so open-minded, my head falls out, kind of thing.
Yeah, you basically become paralyzed, isn't it? You can't do anything.
And you
don't know who to trust, where to go to, that type of thing.
And I think this, and then so linking it back now to the post-truth idea, you have this lack of trust.
Yeah.
Too much information, the information overload, too many sources. You can recognize there's no possibility, because my life is not that long, where I can cover all of this information. And even if I could, I wouldn't have the ability to process it. There's too much going on. And so what happens is this giving up, this sort of like submission, forget it, truth isn't attainable. And then it goes even further for some people, where it's like, truth is whatever you want it to be.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think it comes across, especially in Western society, that's being pushed a lot. This heavy idea that there is no absolute truth. There's your truth and there's my truth.
Yeah. Well, there's a conflict. There's a tension between the society as well. And this is sort of, so I mentioned in the book as well, the link about from Nietzsche, where he's talking about the earth has become unchained from the sun.
Yeah.
And it's floating
off.
And is there any up? How do you determine up from down or left from right? What is it that unites us? And the sun was a thing we all would circumnavigate together. And so the sun here is an analogy for like a communal value system.
Yeah. Some foundation, isn't it?
Yeah, that everyone can unite upon. And that we used to have something like that in Britain in particular. And the way things have gone is that's been released, and this neutral sort of individualism and this liberalism. So the idea of the self is the most important thing, number one. And number two, that absolute freedom is the highest good, has led naturally and quite understandably to everyone going off in their own direction. We don't circumnavigate anything with anyone anymore. And so what you end up seeing is that naturally as well gives rise to a schism within the society. So where there used to be a lot of agreement and overlap, political overlap, that is slowly becoming more divisive. And if you look at data on Pew Research in the US, I think I mentioned this in the book as well. If you look at even just 20 years ago, the difference between Republicans and the Democrats in the US, there was a lot of overlap, a lot of political overlap, a lot of things that they shared that were communal values. And just in 20 years, 2 decades, that overlap has just dissolved to next to nothing. And it's like no one agrees on anything anymore.
Yeah, it's polarized.
But that makes sense if you're motivating everyone to become concerned mostly with the self, individualism, and liberalism. This notion of freedom. Do what you want. Make your own truth.
Yeah. Make your own truth. There is no real truth. There's no objective truth out there.
Yeah.
And also, if you do believe in an objective truth out there, you're classed as dogmatic,
but that's
irrational.
But is that itself? But this is the irony as well.
Yeah.
But the irony here is that is that not also a choice?
Yeah.
So if you're being told make your own truth, eventually it's inevitable that some people are going to say that there is objective truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like they're being told to make their own choices. And then you have a bunch of people that end up becoming conservative, and they end up trying to unite upon something, because you have this idea, like, I think it's quite natural, and not only that, quite obvious, that there has to be a right and a wrong answer to things. What's the answer to the question of like, what's the biggest mountain on earth? Is there a biggest mountain? Is that subject to opinion, or is it just the case? What's the answer to the question of whether or not the sun is a huge ball of plasma? Is there a true answer to that, or is that subject to opinion? There are answers, or there are questions that have true answers. Yeah, that are irrelevant of people's opinions. People recognize that. And so when it comes to like the idea of like, what are you? Yeah. Are you a man? Or are you a keyboard? Or are you, a book, a cat? Like, what are you? Are you a moth? Yeah. Like, is there a right or wrong answer to that question? Yeah. And a part of it is just, again, this idea of too much information. Like even trying to define an animal. Like there's too much concern with the peripheral cases. It's like, how do you define a dog? And then if you try to give a number of attributes,
so we say, oh, this falls outside the attributes.
Yeah, it's like, well, if a dog has 4 legs, what about this dog? And then they show a little one with just 3 legs. And it's like, well, no, that's outside the norm. That's an outlier.
Yeah, I think this is where we'll talk about this later on, inshallah, hopefully, about how Islam sort of, gives us that fitri, it gives us a grounding of fitri knowledge. So it's a grounding of innate ideas that we don't really need to go into a philosophical discussion to try and question every single idea. Because as soon as you start to try putting a pin on every single idea from a philosophical lens, it starts to become obscure, isn't it? It starts to become blurred out again. You just don't get it. But I think what you're saying in terms of the book, in terms of post-truth, the idea that there is no real truths out there is no real fundamental truths. There are too many information out there to form those truths as well for a lot of people out there. They've gone through an education system that's so abstract to real life that they're unable to utilize any of that information for most part in terms of real life. So therefore they're unable to form a coherent idea as well. They've got no tradition to rely upon either, which told them what the truths were, because they're told, no, reject tradition. You are the one to define your own ideas and values and information. Results in what you said, this epistemic nihilism. People just can't work out the answer and think there is no answer as well. Yeah.
Or it becomes an egoistic thing. Like, I'm just going to do whatever suits me best. Like, whatever truths are pragmatic for me, I'm going to adopt them because they better suit my flourishing, quote unquote, and however they define their own flourishing.
So in the book, obviously we're literally just touching the surface of the book. You explain a lot of these ideas, give examples. It's not too heavy in terms of the philosophy of it. So anybody who's a bit worried that it's going to be, heavy philosophically and things like that, it wasn't like that. It was a very good read, understandable read. But I think you explained this point about post-truth, social exhaustion, what we talked about, overchoice, the abundance of overchoice, about the what you call techno hypnosis. I don't know if you want to explain that a little bit.
Yeah, it's like escapism. So people are like falling upon technology to escape having to deal with the burden of life. Yeah, and that could be social media, it could be computer games, it could just be binging Netflix or YouTube. It's just a means by which you don't have to think about your existential crisis anymore. It's something that it can be silly, it can be petty, it can be something that grips you. Or for some people, life is so boring that they have that in the game world they can be something. If you play Skyrim, you're the Dragonborn. Like you are
some
important.
Some of the games that people play, they actually they're so closely related to people's work or real life. It's like they're working.
Well, it's funny because there are games like Eve. Have you heard of Eve?
Yeah.
So Eve Online is a universe simulator.
Yeah.
And people literally have jobs on there where they've got to go and mine.
They're mining planets. It's like,
and they'll spend hours and hours and hours, and they call it the grind, or they'll just go grinding, where they're just trying to pull resources, game resources, wood, or like just crap, so that they can go and sell it on an in-game marketplace. And there was an interview of someone who was like very successful on this game Eve Online. Yeah. And he was like, but he suffered from depression. He's like, in game, I'm a G. Like I am a boss. Like I've conquered the universe. I'm really good and I'm famous and like I'm this important character. But in real life, that's not translated into anything.
Yeah.
Like I've not made anything of myself. And this is the thing, isn't it? Like games are starting to catch up to the point where like, and this is the thing, like with some games, especially like Skyrim and things like that, they're not online. So you become the main character in these games. You become the central figure in each of these games. You become the hero in each of them. And anyone can pick up that game and be the hero, which is the inverse of real life. Because when you're being told as a kid, you can be anything.
You can't.
You recognize that that's not possible.
Yeah.
I am not necessarily going to be the hero of today.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be the contemporary, Troy. What's the guy called that Troy?
Who?
The hero.
Oh, Achilles.
Yeah, I'm not going to be, Achilles. I'm not going to be the Dragonborn in real life. I'm not going to be whoever.
Yeah.
The most famous contemporary. And if I am, it's very, very unlikely.
Yeah.
Like it's against the odds.
Yeah.
And so I think most people recognize that. But if you just buy a copy of Skyrim, you are the Dragonborn. Like you are the main character. You are the hero. And people like that. So they get themselves into it. But that only lasts for so long. You have the law of diminishing returns. The more you are exposed to something, the less of an impact it has on you. So like as a kid, you can jump into these games and you can enjoy it and you can play. And like with this,
there's a point where you've played too much and you're bored of it.
Yeah. But not only that, there's a period in your life where you can do that, and then when you mature and like your naivety leaves you and you become an adult, and it's different for each person, but the ability to play games, is taken away from you. Not necessarily like you can still play the games, but you can't play with the level of seriousness that a child can play a game. Yeah. So when my daughter is playing, with her toys and she's a princess, or she's like the seriousness with which she plays, she's in it. Yeah, she can enjoy it. And if I play with her,
bored out your head.
Yeah, and not just that.
I have the same problem.
Like exactly. You get it. And if we start playing these games, like we play it differently.
Yeah.
Because like the happy ending and things like that. Like the kids, they're enthralled in this fantasy.
Yeah.
And the difference is with us, we've experienced how life isn't always a happy ending. Yeah. Like for me, that happened very early. When I was 9, my dad died. A year later, his brother died. My aunt, my grandma, like I've had friends die. Like death was just boof, 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 one after the other. And it became apparent to me that there's not always a happy ending. That life is difficult. And my naivety was removed from me. My innocence left very, very early. Like 9 years old, that was gone. And so I cannot play like I could before I was 9. There was something that changed in my head because you're not ignorant of the hardships of life anymore. Yeah. Whereas, and this is the issue with young children, they're able to play with this because they don't know about the world. They don't know about
So
evil.
Young adults going into the real world and suddenly those fantasies and naiveties, they're stripped away, isn't it?
Well, there's another thing, because this links now again to the extension of childhood. So for me, things happened very early. So I had to go through all sorts at an age. People don't have to generally go through that. It's rare that someone has to experience their dad die at the age of 9. And then they're like, I know people that my age that still haven't experienced death.
Yeah.
And I've gone through more death than like some people have gone through in their entire lifetime. And not just that, but like we were talking about the education system, how it's no longer puberty that you're considered a man. Yeah, this has been extended, and you're dependent for longer than you ever have been. You're not necessarily contributing. You're not paying your way, and this can go on for years and years and years and years and years. And we're treating people in high school like children as well. And so you have this extension of childhood where people, even though effectively they're men, they've got beards. Some of them, especially mashallah, the brothers from the Pakistani community and the Indian community, are like, they get beards. They can get beards very early. They look like men. My brother, another example, in year 9, he was going to the shop buying us alcohol because he passed as a man. He was very large. He had a deep voice, and he could like walk through a rugby field with 10 kids on his back and not be fazed by it. But this idea of like the extension of childhood and the extension of naivety, the extension of innocence to a certain degree, has a massive impact, because when you hit puberty and you become like essentially physically a man, there's you have to start to feel like one, and if you're not, you're being trained how to continue life as a child.
Right.
And I think this is a big problem as well, Because when people should be learning how to be men, they're being treated, adults, they're being treated like children. And then when it comes to having to become an adult, it's very difficult to transition out of that, because they've almost been conditioned to be children ad infinitum. And like it's this whole killing with kindness thing. Mothers that just want to protect their children from the world, so they cover them in bubble wrap. But then when the parents die, the kids haven't really been given the tools to equip themselves for independence in any shape or form.
And then obviously when the real world hits, and you're told this is the only life, and you're here to maximize your own personal benefit, you've got to make the right choices, you've got no tools to do that, then you think to yourself, I live in this massive cosmic universe which makes me insignificant, like you said, by greater reason. I myself, my life is by great reason is insignificant as well, if the whole universe is insignificant.
And relationships are deteriorating. Like the relationship between children and parents is almost diminished, because you have dual income families. So mum and dad are both out of the household for the majority of the time. And when they come back, they're brain drained. So there's no family dinners anymore. There's no people don't even know the names of their neighbors. There's no community. Everyone's relationships are with a screen. So
that point, because you mentioned that point about fractured societies, and about everybody we're a being in the world. You quoted somebody, I can't remember who you quoted.
Martin Heidegger.
We are a being in the world, meaning that we don't just occupy the world, but we sort of have a view and a shape of the world in our mind. We have an experience of it, and part of that, you said, is having a shape and experience of other people in the world as well.
And this is...
I read the book.
But this is being taken away from the general person, and especially in Western society, where that community isn't really available to them. They don't. Parents don't know their children because they've offloaded the work of raising kids to strangers. The strangers,
or TV or YouTube.
So it's the other, and they're not even quite sure what's going on, because they're too tired and they don't have the time or the energy, the effort that they could put into trying to figure these things out. So that's been offloaded to strangers, and children don't know who their parents are, and so they might not even know who their brothers and sisters are. Like I'm very close to my mum, my brother, my sister, and we've got a very close family, and I find it very, very strange when I see like brother, sibling relationships where other people don't have the closest that my family have. Like they don't have they don't shake hands, they don't hug. Like every time even if I'm talking to my brother, and it sounds really weird to so many people, but I'll say I love you, and he'll say I love you, and then we hang up, and that's normal for me and him. And we're two grown men from a council estate in North Manchester, and like. I know people that can't say that to their own dad. Like we hug when we see each other, and we give a proper hug, and we say "miss you, mate." And some people they don't even shake hands with their dad. They've never had a hug off their dad. They don't tell each other they love each other. Like they're like strangers almost. It's really weird, but this is common, and like there's problems with this, because when people don't have that sense of a relationship or a family. Like it's even more difficult to try to establish that kind of relationship with people outside of the family.
But how does that relate to nihilism, though?
Because having a meaningful life is related to being a part of a community, because we are social beings. We're not just so the beings in the world. Is one aspect of it. We are beings in a world, but we're also beings with others. We're intimately connected to other people, and it's a huge part of our makeup that we have connections with people. And when you don't have them, there's a feeling of loss in the world. Like you feel disconnected, you feel alone. Problems of loneliness are huge, and they're related to problems of depression and suicide. And if there's a connection between depression and suicide with nihilism, and there's a connection between loneliness and depression and suicide, then ipso facto, there's a connection between loneliness and nihilism as well. So like this is a big part of the problem, is that people don't feel connected anymore. They feel alone. Like the epistemological nihilism, like I can't know anything, and I'm going through all of this, and not only that, I can't even communicate it to other people. No matter how much I say to anyone, can they really understand the woes of what it's like to be me? And this is a huge problem for people, that they're going through their social angst or their existential anxieties, and they don't feel like they can really ever communicate that with someone. They go even like I had this issue when I was going to counseling. I had a counselor, and I'm trying to express everything to them. It's like, I don't think I could ever really explain to you the problems I'm going through, like what's going on in my heart, what's going on in my head. I don't think you're ever really, the problem of consciousness, like trying to get what's going on in here with linear words. I've got this huge 4-dimensional thing in my head with all of these problems, all of my life experiences, and I'm limited to telling you one word at a time. How am I supposed to do that? And then I've got to hope that when I'm telling you, you're listening, and that you're creating the same map in your head as is in my head. But I can't direct you on where each part of the puzzle is supposed to go. I can only tell you what the piece is. So you got this problem of communication, and then you feel like, I don't even know what's going on in my own head. I can barely understand myself. How am I supposed to communicate that to others? And there's this sense of dread that comes with that, this loneliness, this closing in of the walls. And this is where, I guess, if you want to, we can start to transition to like how Islam is an antidote to this.
Yeah. I think we need to, definitely.
So,
because obviously you split the book up into a number of areas. First area, the importance of this topic, which I think, alhamdulillah, we've got across. Then you talked about, we've only touched on a few of the causes, but you're going through the causes of nihilism.
The causes and the effects.
Yeah. So just to reiterate as well, because most people don't rationalize themselves to nihilism or get to a position where they've rationally, philosophically come to idea of nihilism, and then said, I've got to rationally come out of it or whatever it is.
And even if they don't recognize what nihilism is and things like that, they don't even realize they're in nihilism. Yeah. So they're experiencing, and I can't tell you the amount of times that people have like watched the series I did with Sabot Ahmed, and they've messaged me and they said, I've been going through stuff and I didn't even know there was a word for it.
Right.
And I watched that and I know now what I've been having is nihilism.
Because what it is that this feeling that individuals can have, or across societies, it's because of the background, it's the structures of society and the ideas of society that's creating that.
It's the air they breathe.
Yeah. So, this is, I always look at this as part of a critique of liberalism, to be honest. Secular liberal capitalism, the type of environment and societies that we live in. This is what's it's creating regardless of this. So you talk about the causes and you talk about the background information, and like you said, what's really important for people is that if they are feeling it, I think the first thing is they've got to be aware of that, what the problem is.
You've got to recognize the issue and try to understand what's
the
causing it,
background information that's created that. Yeah, definitely. Then you go on to and you talk about overcoming the obstacles in the book. So you basically saying, okay, you're Muslim, you looked at Islam, you saw Islam as that cure, isn't it, as that solution to nihilism or the sickness that you felt that maybe you didn't have a name for, but you can address.
So with regards to the first bit, sometimes people have these, like people fall into this sort of like fatalism where it's like, oh, I have these problems.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be anything, because they can't even really backtrack. They can't identify what's causing the problem.
Yeah.
So the first part of the book is just, this is what nihilism is. This is what the cause is. This is what the effects are. And what you'll find is that if someone is suffering from this, when they're reading that section in particular, they'll start to recognize, this is the problems that I'm facing. Okay. And then they can start to connect the dots, realize that this is what's going on, and they can start to understand their predicament. And if you understand what the causes are, if you understand what the effects are, you can start to try to think about how to cure it. In the same way, if you're just experiencing these random illnesses, you're a pharmacist. It's
something like that.
But the issue of
you got to look at the underlying cause of the illness.
And if
you look at symptoms, and the symptoms all point to something deeper,
then you know what you need to apply as a medicine.
That's right. Yeah.
And so this is a similar principle I'm trying to put here. Is that like, okay, so this is maybe what you're going to be suffering from. And then so then we need to move. Okay, well, what about a cure?
Yeah.
Now I think that the cure is Islam, and the reason I think it's the cure is because, number one, it's true. Number two, that you've got good reasons to believe in it. You've got good reasons to believe Allah exists. Allah is one. That Tawheed it makes more sense. It's more clear than things like Trinity, polytheism, etc. The Quran has a good case for it being for divine authorship, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has a good case to say that he is a prophet. And Allah has sent him, and that Allah gave him the Quran. And because of these, you have good reasons to believe that it's true, that it also offers you a foundation and a guideline for how to live your life, and then a number of these things that it promotes and instills on every level, on an individual basis, on a communal level, on a societal level, all of these things act as ways of preventing getting in the way of the causes.
Yeah.
So the things that give rise,
it gives grounding, and it gives a compass direction, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, and what it does is whatever used to cause nihilism, if you have this in place, then those causes can't come to being. They can't affect you because you've been protected from these causes. So, and then not only that, the effects you now have an antidote for the effects as well. Because if you believe in Islam, if you accept this as a rational position and as truth, because it is truth, and because not just because, and this is a criticism I get sometimes when we're talking about this subject, people say, oh, you only use Islam because it makes you feel better. And no, like,
but it wouldn't work, would it? The whole point is that you can't become spiritual or religious if you don't believe it's true.
Exactly, because then it's like when you're playing games with children.
You're just reinforcing nihilism.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's just a game that you play. And you can't really take it seriously. And if you play it like that, it's not going to be the cure.
So the whole problem of nihilism
is not resolved by playing the game of Islam.
And I think there's partly would be a critique of people like Jordan Peterson, because he's all about nihilism as well, and criticizing nihilism without necessarily using the word nihilism. That's in essence, but he does it by promoting Christianity
like a game,
like
we're going to play Monopoly.
It's a useful myth. It's a useful fiction.
It's pragmatic. And my issue with that is not going to be a solution to it. And like maybe there might be some type of placebo effect to some degree for some people, but I think ultimately deep down, if someone is playing that game that they know that they don't really believe in it, then it's not going to have the right impact or the same impact as it would for those who look at the evidences, are sincerely and openly convinced of that particular position, and then embrace it because they think it's true. And despite the difficulties that it might cause, because it's not always simple or it's not always easy. Like being a Muslim, or me becoming a Muslim, was very difficult because I came from a very racist community where, like, there's huge divisions between the white British populace who are indigenous and, say, the Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Indian community that lived the opposite side of town. So, and there was huge tensions between us, and religion, or Islam in particular, was associated to that community. And if you were to exit your religion, or you could get away with being any religion apart from Islam, like you could be a Buddhist, no one would give a crap, but you pick Islam, then you're a race traitor. Like you have left us, you've left the community. And there is a sense of like apostasy from the white British nationalist position. So that it's very difficult to become a Muslim. It's not easy, having to take up all of these responsibilities can be hard, and they can be draining, and it can be difficult to get into the habit of praying 5 times a day, fasting for a full month in the Ramadan when you've never had any experience in that. Fearing hellfire, worrying about now having to give dawah to the wider community, to your family and your friends. All of these things are very, very difficult. And you're only going to continue in that if you believe it's true. Like wholeheartedly and sincerely. And this is where the Islam as a cure fits in, that it makes a good case, that it is true, that it does appeal to the needs of the human being, because the one who created this religion understands the needs of the human being to a very great degree, and it does it in a much better way than the alternative solutions are. So for like Christianity, for example, one of the reasons I couldn't be a Christian, because if I did, it would feel like I was a child at play. Because you have this completely you've got this completely nonsensical theology that just falls apart when you scrutinize it. It's like, well, what about this? Like how you're telling me Jesus is God and is not the Father, and you're telling me that the Father is God and is not Jesus, and what? Like, so they're distinct from one another, so they've got attributes that the others don't have. Jesus has things that the Father doesn't. Jesus is the only begotten Son. You can't say that about the Father. But then you're saying they're both identical to God. Yet God is, and if that is the case, if God is identical to both.
What I find really interesting, because somebody messaged me a question because there was some non-Muslim woman who was interested in Islam and was given a philosophical answer to the contention about Trinity, and actually contacted Jake because I didn't understand the response that was given by this other Christian guy. And then I responded back to the brother, and I said, look, I said, what you should say to this woman who's interested in Islam and thinking of leaving Christianity, say, firstly, do you understand the answer that's given to you to try to reconcile this problem, this logical problem? If you don't understand it, at what level do you need to have to be able to even just to make it coherent in your mind? Yeah. So what philosophical level do you need to understand, the ideas of the Trinity? And for most people, the vast majority of people, they're just not going to accept it as a logically coherent set of ideas.
Well, most of them fall into heresies.
Yeah,
you push
exactly.
them on it,
Yeah,
like they always end up in a heresy.
Yeah.
They don't.
So in essence, just to summarize the points, you've got epistemic nihilism and what you explain in the book about the cure to that, and you quote various verses of the Quran about how actually we have that trust in the authority, and we've got reasons, as you mentioned, rational reasons why we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, why we believe the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we have now an authority that says there are truths that we can be certain about.
And he's a good authority to take those truths from, because he has certain attributes. For example, he's the all-knowing, he's the most wise, so on and so forth. So if he's giving us information, he's giving it to us from the best perspective. Whereas we are finite and we have issues where we can always make mistakes and we're fallible, etc. Like and this is like where the problem of authority comes in. Like when we're looking at the scientific community, there's a pragmatic element to it. And a big part of the philosophy of science is that science has to be malleable, because it's an inference to the best explanation based on the available evidence. And as new evidence comes in, that can transform the model, that can transform the paradigm. And so it has to be malleable, because we have to recognize the epistemic limits of human-made systems. Now, if Islam is true and it is given to you by an all-knowing being, it's not going to suffer from the same problems. So it's important to understand that, because if you are linked to that being via revelation that can be preserved or understood to be preserved, that can be directed back to a particular person, i.e. the Prophet, and that can be said to be accurately have been given to him from Allah, then you've got good reason to accept the information that's being presented there.
And also, there's also a fundamental thing, which is that if you detach any externalist view of knowledge, how do we know what we know? And you say everything that we know, what we know, is based upon what is me. And then you say, well, how do I know that my experiences are true experiences? How do I know that my brain's not deceiving me for the purposes of survival, not necessarily for the purposes of truth gathering? You can never know that. There's like this, there's sort of a circularity. You have to have that, to a certain extent, a leap of faith that your experiences are true. Whereas an externalist view of knowledge, meaning that we believe God exists and that God gives us the rational faculties to be able to know the truth, then you have some sort of epistemic grounding to say, okay, what I believe
even have the ability
true.
to manage this information, to observe it, to find truth.
I have a fitri, innate disposition to know truth. And I can believe in that because God has told me that.
And so we link, this is,
so there's a coherent view.
But this links to the overcoming the obstacles thing. So basically, like, I'm giving Islam as an antidote, but I basically say, well, before I can do that, I know for a fact that there are going to be certain things that prevent people from even wanting to go over part 4. And it's going to be the typical sort of new atheist responses that just make the person shut their ears to even hearing this. Because the Islam as an antidote isn't an argument for why Islam is true. It's an explanation of how, if you accept Islam as truth, because you've gone over the cases, maybe you've read Divine Reality, for example, or you've gone through the proofs of prophethood, or whatever it is that you've done to be able to get to the conclusion that Islam is true, that once you've done that, this is how Islam is an antidote to each of the issues that I outlined in part 2, like the causes and the effects, or how it's going to be an antidote to post-truth, how it's going to help you with societal exhaustion, how it's going to help you with being overwhelmed by overabundance, or the so on and so forth, society, obligation, duty.
The techno-hypnosis, or the drugs and alcohol,
how is
distractions in life.
So obviously the part 4 is all about explaining how it gets... it offers itself as a solution.
Even this idea, because you talk about patience and perseverance, the fact that, let's say this idea that you mentioned at the beginning, where you talk about education, you said you can do whatever you want, and at the end of it, you're being lapped 14th time on Mario Kart, But you're then saying, yeah, but if God is pleased with me, even if I'm not quote unquote successful in worldly standards, then I'm successful in the real standard. Yeah. Not in the monopoly standard.
Yeah, exactly. So, but just going back to part 3. So part 3, overcoming the obstacles. It talks about like the common objections that are put forward by new atheists and why these aren't necessarily good. So like one example is we talk about leaps of faith and how the idea of faith itself has become a dirty word.
Yeah.
And atheists love to pretend that they don't have any faith in anything, that they don't accept leaps of faith.
Well, they have to, like I said, they have to have the leap of faith of believing that their rational faculties are actually rational.
Yeah, and that the universe is something that can be understood and explored and broken down into its component parts, and that we can have an accurate representation
which are
as a model.
Yeah,
that's comprehensible and communicate, and something that you can communicate to others effectively. So, the point is that basically I show the atheist has a leap of faith, and they have many, and they're only and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
They at least just need to own up to where their leaps of faith are. They're not going to be the same as the theist. We have our own leaps of faith. They have theirs. Everyone has a leap of faith. But it's this idea, like in the Quran, it says everyone has a direction to which they turn. Everyone has a qibla. And the atheist is stuck in this idea that they're telling everyone not to face north, not to face west, not to face south. And they say, don't face north, don't face a direction. It's like, well, where do I face? They say, just do what we're doing. We don't face any direction at all.
But they're facing east.
Yeah, and it's like, no. You can't. If I'm not facing north, I have to face a different direction.
Yeah,
I'm always facing something.
Yeah.
If you're not religious, if you don't have religious values, you value other things. If you don't believe in God, you have replaced Him with something else. Everyone has a value hierarchy, like a pyramid, and God, if He exists, should be at the top of that. And the Muslim ideally lives like that. Allah Azza wa Jal is at the top of the value hierarchy, which is to say that they value Him more than they value anything. And whenever they think of anything else throughout the day, every day of the week, every week of the year, that like every decision is in relation to the thing that you value the most, because He is the one that dominates your life. Because you care about Him more than you care about anything else. So even when you're dealing with your parents, you're thinking of your parents and your interactions with them in relation to Allah. When you are thinking of what job you're going to take, what career you're going to do, you're thinking of it in relation to Allah. Now, if you remove Allah from that value hierarchy, from that pyramid, number one, He stays on there. You've just put Him to the bottom, or you put Him lower down. And then what happens is something else takes the top. Something else replaces the thing that you value the most. And that is inevitably going to be something in the dunya. It's going to be something on earth. You're going to value your career, your family, your wife, or women in general, sex, money, power, whatever it is. There's something else that becomes the most important thing in your life. And if it's the most important thing in your life, all your other decisions are going to be in relation to that. And it might not even be static. It might not be something that remains the same. It might change. So, you might wake up in the morning and your wife might be your God. And then you might, as the day goes on and you get into work, your manager becomes your God. And, whatever it is, it can be something somewhat malleable depending on the situation and the context. But you have, and like Allah says, have you seen those who take their own desires as gods? Now, this isn't saying that the people that take their desires as gods recognize what they're doing as taking something in worship.
That's the higher value that they've now submitted themselves to.
And when atheists read this, go, I don't have a God, I don't worship anything. It's like, no, you don't even understand the Islamic concept of worship. Worship is a holistic thing. Like smiling for the sake of Allah is worship. Ibadah is very general, and it's anything more vaguely speaking, that in relation to the thing that you value the most. If you do something for the thing you value the most, that becomes worship. If I do anything for Allah, and I do it properly, with the right intentions, according to the Sharia, as He's outlined specifically, then that becomes worship. That becomes something that may please Allah Azza wa Jal if I've done it properly. And so, whatever it is, it could be giving charity, smiling.
And I think you mention it in the book, which is that when you detach belief in God, this all-knowing, all just, all-wise Creator, from the values within your life, then it's like what you mentioned about Nietzsche, where he says that the earth has become detached from the sun. There's no foundation now to now give meaning to those values anymore, because the thing that gave them meaning was your belief in a creator
Yeah.
as well. So on the one hand, you've got the problem of having higher values, but really you recognize implicitly, even if you don't recognize it explicitly, implicitly, you know that these are not real higher values. Like the Monopoly game, you know, you're earning lots of Monopoly money and you're thinking you're earning lots of money, but you know, really it's not.
Yeah, you don't really value the money.
Exactly.
There's something else.
So, well, the Islam, it gives God at the hierarchy of this pyramid, and that forms now the linchpin that connects everything else.
Yep.
How you interact at work, how you interact with your family, etc., neighbors, community. So it creates that. So it's like, again, it's what you mentioned. It's like a cure to that particular aspect, maybe of moral nihilism in that situation as well. So you have this epistemic nihilism. How to solve that? Well, we've got the view about Islam, how to come to its beliefs, and you explain that in the obstacles. And
knowledge is attainable.
Knowledge is attainable. And you quote various verses of Quran which says that God has given us the ability to attain that knowledge as well, and is the truth as well. So you've got that foundation for us, that stability. Then you've got that moral nihilism on one hand, and yet you've got this moral anchor when it comes to belief in God. And then also you mentioned about cosmic nihilism as well, and existential nihilism.
Yeah. So Islam solves this in the sense that Allah is all-knowing. Like He's the all-powerful. He's more than capable of giving you as much attention as you need. Because he has to give you attention because He's sustaining you. He's maintaining you. He creates the environment. And there's nothing that happens in your life that He's not aware of. So, and you are on the Day of Judgment shown everything you've ever done. So there's a whole account of your life, and every single deed is held to account.
Yeah.
So if you've done bad, you will reap the recompense of that. If you have done good, whether or not it's worked out into any worldly benefit is irrelevant.
Yeah.
If you intended good, Allah will give you good.
Yeah.
And that might be the case if even it didn't manifest. You know, like when you go to, what was a good example? I think someone intended to do something good. I can't remember what it was. I think they wanted to give charity or something. But then they didn't need to. Or like with the Lighthouse Project, there's some brothers, and they turn up to the meetings as a mentor. They're waiting. They've done loads of research, and they're waiting for this person to come to the meeting so they can help them with their doubts and get them back on deen and help them overcome all of these issues that they're facing. And then the person doesn't turn up.
Yeah.
And it's like, they didn't turn up.
Yeah. But
that was all for nothing. It's like, but it wasn't for nothing, was it?
That's right.
Because Allah Azza wa Jal recognizes that you intended to help this person, you'll get the reward for helping them. Or when someone, my wife was talking about certain things that she had to go through, and that she was going to the doctors and they were giving her certain things, and then in the end, they ended up taking a completely different course of action, which made all of the medicine and everything that she was taking completely pointless. And it's like, no, but it wasn't pointless because the medicine entails a certain amount of suffering.
Right.
And it's like, well, in Islam, none of that is pointless because Allah says there's nothing that befalls a believer, be that any hardship at all, or anxiety or distress or pain or suffering or even the pricking of a thorn, but that Allah Azza wa Jal will expiate your sins by it. So even if it doesn't seem like there is a point to it from a dunya perspective, in a dunya sense, ultimately there is in the grand scheme of things, because we extend beyond the dunya, we encompass the akhirah and what occurs on the Day of Judgment. And so therefore everything, like another hadith said, everything is good for the believer. Everything is good for the believer, good or bad, however you experience it, enjoyable or painful or whatever it is, there's good in it for the believer. And so this completely transforms the way the person interacts with their life. Even there's a bitter sweetness to even the negatives that crop up in your life, the hardship. You go through a divorce, you become sick, you get cancer, whatever it is. As a Muslim, it's not like it's not going to hurt anymore. It's not like there's not going to be a pain, but there's a sweetness associated to that pain now. That, like, we've got a mutual friend, his son passed away. As an atheist, I can't imagine how difficult these kind of things would be to have to deal with. So kind of like that. The friend,
unless they're optimistic nihilists.
But
even that
is still, that's like sad. But but when you have iman,
it's a sad mentality to have, which is, well, it's meaningless anyway. So the death of my son was meaningless.
And my experience of the pain is meaningless.
And
but like with Islam, it's like no, none of that was meaningless. Like his life isn't meaningless. Like even the idea of where he's gone. He's not having to, like, it's like a cheat sheet, isn't it? He gets to skip a lot of the trials that you have to deal with, having to grow up as an adult in the dunya and all of the problems that are faced. Like there's a certain sense of them being saved from trials.
Yeah.
So there's like it can be seen as a blessing. It can be seen and can transform it into something infused with meaning and purpose, and it can become a beautiful thing. And that doesn't stop it from being sad.
Yeah.
That doesn't stop it from being painful to some degree, but because the pain has had a meaning associated with it,
contextualized.
yeah, you can bear it, you can shoulder it, and this is highly recognized in the field of psychology, where they recognize that there was a really, really good book by Viktor Frankl, and like he's talking about how like suffering can always be bared if you have a why. And there's a really, really good example of a man who was very, very sad because his wife had passed away. And he's like, she died and blah, 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 and life. And Viktor Frankl was just saying to him, think of it this way. By you outliving your wife, you saved her from having to deal with the pain of losing you.
Right.
And this alone was something that transformed this man's way of looking at the pain of losing his wife, because now there's like a meaning to it. Now he's a hero to some degree. He saved his wife from something by outliving her, and he couldn't imagine how she would have had to deal with it if he had died first. And so, now, just the way that these things can be transformed based on your outlook on it. And Islam is an amazing way of transforming how you deal with the pain and the sufferings of life. And and obviously with very, very, very briefly just sort of scratch the surface of everything in this book. But it's probably a good place to sort of wrap up here.
But like I said, what's really good about that book is that it's not heavy, philosophically dense read.
I've made it for the layman. Like I've tried my best to make it for the average person.
Yeah. When we say layman, sometimes layman comes across as like derogatory.
No, I don't mean it.
I know you do. I know. But even the term, as in, it's understandable for people, because that's the whole point. Because it's meant to be for people.
I want it to be accessible.
Yeah. It's accessible, that's right. And it's accessible, and it explains the causes of this general malaise and depression and feeling of meaninglessness, and maybe some of the philosophical notions that maybe people have come across in terms of nihilism, and explains its causes, as well as going in and explains how to assess or approach assessing Islam as a true religion. And then how Islam deals with many of the problems that have caused nihilism, how it remedies it in a particular way. So I think it's something that I hope, inshallah, the audience members get an opportunity. It can be found on Sapiens Institute.
Yeah, so you can get it on the website. So you've got sapiensinstitute.org/books.
Can you get a hard copy?
So you can get the PDF off the Sapiens website. You can get a hard copy from Amazon. So you just search Yusuf Ponders.
Yep.
It'll pop up there. It's also going to be on Audible.
That'd be brilliant. That.
Yeah, so with that,
double speed it.
Yeah. So that should be on there soon.
I'm sure people will be double speeding this.
I sometimes I have 3 times speed on Audible. Yeah.
I only get double speed on YouTube though. So.
Yeah, YouTube has a limit of 2 times, but Audible you can get a crazy speed.
That'd be too much.
But I got used to it now, so I like. And then when I put it to 1 time speed, it sounds like they talk in slow motion. So you can check it out there. I think obviously, if you've not got an Audible account, I think the audio book will be made available on the website as well. So you can get it free there. But please do help us out by leaving reviews on the
Amazon.
On Amazon.
Yeah.
So just check that out there. Check us out with Sapiens Institute. We've got a YouTube channel. Just search Sapiens Institute. We've got the website. We've got the Lighthouse Project. We've got a learning platform where there's courses that go into this. There's a course on nihilism as well that I produced, which is free. And a lot of the material that's in the book I got from the course that I'd produced. So you can get that as well at learn.sapiensinstitute.org. But it should be like all over the place. If you just search Yusuf Ponders on Amazon or...
Yes, it's inshallah. So we'll put a link anyway in the YouTube for it, inshallah. But Jazakallah khair, Yusuf.
Jazakallah khair.
For
Sharif.
For producing the book.
Yeah,
and hopefully, inshallah,
Jazakallah khair for reading it.
Yeah, and I brought out quotes that I must have read. Yeah. So alhamdulillah. No, I really enjoyed it, and like I said, I thought it's very useful. And I think the problem with this, it's a really broad topic, but the way
I could have made it a lot bigger.
Yeah, you could have made it a lot bigger, but the way you were able to structure it in the way it was makes it easy to understand and follow. But even the subsections of each topic, like for example, techno hypnosis or fractured societies and things like that. They're books in themselves as well. But alhamdulillah, I think it was really well done. And I think whatever level, Muslim, non-Muslim, because Muslims can suffer obviously from nihilism or nihilistic thoughts or depression, things like that. It's important. Non-Muslims out there, hopefully, inshallah, you guys will pick up the book, read it, and understand and appreciate it. So Jazakallah khair, and Jazakallah khair for watching us today. Hopefully you liked the sort of new, the new, what do you call it? The new format,
style. The new aesthetics.
New aesthetics.
My favorite.
It may not necessarily all the time we're going to do this, but alhamdulillah, because me and Yusuf live in the same city-ish area, we're able to do this a bit more in this format. But inshallah, in future, we'll try and do this more often as well. Please like, share, subscribe, and if you can support us, because inshallah we'll be producing more content. I know brothers were saying, where's all the content? So we're going to produce more content, inshallah. We're also going to have Abdulrahman and Jake, inshallah, when they're free as well, coming on as well. So Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And hopefully see you next time.
Assalamu alaikum.